like, bro, yeah, she got a kid. Look at his back. Oh my god. Welcome back to another reaction. Today we're going to be reacting to why Russia might win World War III nuclear conflict. Former CIA tells truth. Peter Vincent Pry. Yes, World War III is closer than ever. The fact that Ukraine has been invaded by Russia and this is a hogged out, dragging out war, not what Putin wanted when he had first invaded the country. He was expecting a quick knockout, lightning war, but that didn't happen. The Ukrainians held out and they fought for their homeland, and they're going to probably continue fighting for their homeland as long as they continue to get aid from the West. And this is another thing that I think Putin wasn't really expecting, was such a shift of all Western countries towards him. Like, it's basically the whole world versus Russia. And all these sanctions that they're facing, they're going to have the repercussions, you know, because Russia was thinking that they were going to be able to hold off on their cash that was outside of their country. Like, they can use that to reinforce the war inside their country. But they didn't expect the nations to take the stance that they did, confiscating all their money, their vehicles, everything that belongs to them outside that country. It's gone. It belongs to their billionaires, the oligarchs, gone. Yeah, man. But with all that to say, who's to think that Russia may feel like they may have nothing to lose here and they may just deploy the nuclear tactic? Because to them, they have a military doctrine where it's escalation to de-escalation. So they use nukes to quickly gain an advantage, and then they take that advantage to be able to bring about peace, or apparently to them. Because using nuclear weapons is going to lead to peace. I feel like using nuclear weapons is just going to cause a retaliation that's going to lead to the annihilation of mankind as we know it, or at least the people that live in the Western Hemisphere throughout most of Asia. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's just a scary thought. But hey, if you're enjoying the videos, hit that like button, subscribe, and share. It's a road to 10K. We're going to hop right into this to see what he has to say.
Fighting the war in Ukraine with its fingers, not with its fists. What we're seeing on the ground is concocted, and it's fiction that is intended to deceive us. If Russia wanted to defeat the NATO alliance, it could do a nuclear EMP attack on NATO, and the resulting EMP field would black out electric grids from Ireland all the way to the edge of Ukraine. Yeah. NATO would in effect be paralyzed by that one blow. Would the United States put itself at risk to save NATO Europe? Do the Russians really believe that we would do that? The Russians know that you can certainly win a nuclear war, and I think they're calling our bluff right now.
Hi folks, Canadian Prepper here. So today on the channel we have a very special guest, Dr. Peter Vincent Pry. He is Executive Director of the Task Force on National and Homeland Security, served as Chief of Staff of the Congressional EMP Commission. I've spoken about him and his work on this channel many times before. Worked for the CIA and a variety of other places, I'm sure has a couple PhDs. And he's going to talk all about nuclear vulnerabilities on the NATO side of things, how a nuclear exchange between NATO and Russia might play out, maybe give some insights, whatever he can, on the current situation that's going on. And while we have people here, I know some people have a short attention span. So I think it's very important that you guys stick around for this talk, because Dr. Pry is going to talk about a fundamental belief that we as Westerners have, which is basically that our perception of nuclear weapons is one of nuclear deterrence. And most of us have been indoctrinated into the belief that a nuclear war is not only unwinnable, but unthinkable, okay? And that's because of something called mutually assured destruction, the idea that if we did start lobbing nukes back and forth, we of course would destroy ourselves. Now, Dr. Pry is going to challenge you on that in the sense that in the East, they don't possess this fundamental belief. They, in fact, view things quite differently, where it's almost as cut and dry as we drive on the right side of the road, they drive on the left side of the road. In the East, they actually believe they can win a nuclear war, and they base their whole military strategy around that. So without further ado, I'm just going to let Dr. Pry talk all about that and everything else. So let us know what you think about this, Dr. Pry.
Sure. Well, the idea that a nuclear war is unwinnable is deeply embedded in our strategic culture and in the values of Judeo-Christian civilization, which believe in just war theory, not limiting collateral damage, to civilian populations, and because free societies that are based on democracies or republics, the most valuable thing in them, at least theoretically, is supposed to be the people. And so weapons of mass destruction that threaten the people is almost inconceivable for such societies that place the highest value on human life as the idea that a nuclear war or use of weapons of mass destruction type war would be winnable, because you're destroying the thing that is most valued to you. But the strategic cultures of authoritarian and totalitarian states that don't place their highest value on the lives of the people, but place their highest values on, for example, in ideology, or place their and on the elites that run that society and who are the ideological spearheads of that society, whether it's a belief in the great Russian nationalism or a belief in communism, or a belief in the semi-divine status of Kim Jong-un of North Korea, or a belief in radical Islam. If that is your highest value and people are just a means to that end, then you can conceive of victory in a circumstance where you've lost millions of lives in a conflict if you achieve your political, geostrategic, ideological goals.
Yeah.
You can see this, for example, in the Soviet victory in World War II, where they lost 30 million lives, not casualties, but 30 million dead. In fact, conquering the very area that they have invaded today in Ukraine. They're called the Bloodlands, the area from Ukraine into Eastern Europe of the Bloodlands, where 30 million Soviet soldiers died. And that's considered a great victory, even though it cost them 30 million lives. In the West, we have never made such sacrifice, lost such a large proportion of our population. America's, the United States loss in World War II was a few 100,000 people, nothing like 30 million people. And we probably wouldn't have considered it a victory if we had to pay such an awful cost. Now, this we have very different strategic cultures. You have to remember that, particularly here in North America. I think for Canadians and for in the United States both, we've had a long history where we've been isolated from the wars of Europe and Asia by the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. The only really big war that we've had here in the United States was the American Civil War, the bloodiest war we've ever fought. 750,000 people lost in that war. But for the most part, we've had a very good life here in North America. You know, our focus has been on economic prosperity, living the good life. We've gotten involved in wars overseas when we think we've had to, but we've never experienced the kind of mass destruction on our own territories that a country like Russia has, for example, that has a very different strategic culture than ours, that going back before modern times, going back to the times of the Mongols and before that, have been exposed to numerous invasions by other countries, have had mass destruction of their civilian population. Those that we know of, beginning around 1000 AD or so, invasions by the Mongols, invasions by the Swedish Empire, invasions by Germany.
Yeah, I mean, Russia's over 800 plus years old.
In pre-modern times, there were Christian crusades launched out of Germany against part of Russia, invaded by Napoleon,
pagans.
Invaded by Germany again in World War I.
The First Crusade.
So their strategic culture is one where the expectation of what I would call a paranoid strategic culture. It's paranoid from our perspective, but from their perspective, given their history, it's not paranoid to think, wow, we're going to get invaded. That happens very frequently, and they've got to be prepared for a massive war that's going to be fought on their territory, and a total war that's aimed at the destruction of their people. That's a belief that's ingrained in Russian strategic culture in a way that it isn't ingrained in ours, where we're much more used to peace and to limited wars of limited objectives, where we're not out to wage genocidal wars against our adversaries. In fact, we'd like to reconstruct them and turn them into democracies if that's possible, when when we win a war. And as a consequence of our belief that a nuclear war is unwinnable because it would be such a destructive thing, we have postured our strategic forces. People think that the Russian nuclear posture and our nuclear posture are the same. They're not. They're as different as night and day. It's true that both sides have intercontinental ballistic missiles and submarines and strategic bombers, but that's about where the similarity ends. Our strategic posture is positioned for transparency and for avoiding nuclear war and deterring it. So most of our weapons are not on intercontinental ballistic missiles, ICBMs, which can be launched in minutes. We've even downloaded the warheads off of our ICBMs, so every ICBM only carries a single warhead. This is a signal to Russia that we don't plan a first strike against them. Because if you were planning a first strike, you build up your ICBM force, you put multiple warheads on it, so that one missile could take out many silos, many targets. But we don't do that. In fact, the ICBM force is the smallest part of our triad. We rely much more heavily on sub-launched ballistic missiles that are not equipped with intercontinental ballistic missiles. They have intermediate range missiles. So our submarines have to put to sea in order to attack Russia. And they can see when our submarines are in port. You know, we don't keep most of them at sea. Only about a third of them are out at sea to be survivable. But most of them are at port, and our adversaries can see that. So they can see we haven't mobilized our forces to launch a surprise attack against them. And the bombers, well, we have more warheads on them than we have on the ICBMs too, and it takes 3 days to mobilize our bomber force. So it's something that they would see us doing. We're not postured to make a surprise attack every day. The Russians are different. You know, they have never forgotten the many surprise attacks that they've suffered, including Operation Barbarossa, which was when Nazi Germany almost conquered the Soviet Union and almost destroyed it in a massive surprise attack. And their general staff says, we're never going to be surprised again. If there's ever another war, we're going to be the ones making the surprise attack. And they have postured their strategic forces to do that exactly. Most of their warheads are on intercontinental ballistic missiles that are ready to launch in a few minutes. Even their ballistic missile submarines carry intercontinental ballistic missiles, so they don't have to put to sea in order to attack us. They can launch right from port side and strike us, just like the land-based ICBM force. Even their ballistic missile submarines at sea, unlike us, you know, they usually don't send their submarines into the deep oceanic areas of the Pacific and the Atlantic. They're afraid that we would use our attack submarines to surprise them and attack their ballistic missile submarines. So they protect their submarines from surprise attack by keeping them in bastion areas, this White Sea and the Sea of Okhotsk, which are heavily defended by their Navy. Now, underwater, they have cables across the bottom of these seas so that their submarines can clandestinely hook in to the General Staff Command and Control Network. So we can't even listen in if they're sending communications, unlocking codes, emergency action messages. They can get all of that secretly by these cables, just like all the other missile forces of Russia. They can raise the mobilization of their forces secretly. We won't see it, and then they could launch their surprise attack.
Yeah, a lot of the Russian stuff is automated, like computers run like the missile silos and shit like that. Like they have a system to where if all of the elite is eliminated and the system is not able to reach anyone of the elite, someone within like the higher sphere of power, then automatically all of the nukes are sent out in to destined enemies or targets, and it is annihilate whoever is left. And that's with all the nukes that remain. You know what I mean? But there's a lot with Russia. You know, the age, like he's talking about, the strategic value of how they use their military, the way we see their military and the way that Russia sees their military are two different things. Like he said with the past examples, World War II was a very clear-cut example of how we only lost about 400,000 altogether during World War II. I don't know if it was World War. It might have been. Obviously, there was more casualties than that, but 400,000 like deaths. And then we had the Soviet Union. You lost over 30 million people. You know, you got the Germans destroying whole villages and towns and shit, but they're fighting on the Eastern Front, house to house, city to city, weaponized artillery, tanks and shit. So they faced a war of genocide, of annihilation, And this pretty much has destined them to see that that there is an expendable amount of death before you can claim victory. So for them to be able to take so much death is important to their military tactic, as they realize that there's an afterthought to the war. So what happens after the nuclear conflict? Like, is it just over? Is Russia just done? I doubt that they even want to see Russia be non-existent as a state after a nuclear war. Like he said, it's about the ideology. If the elite exists, then technically Russia is still alive in a way. You know? I want to break this up into parts, and then the next part, I've seen a little bit of this. He gets into like the ways that Russia's been preparing, like infrastructure-wise, for nuclear war, and how the United States has kind of like fallen off of that after the fall of the Soviet Union. You know, like how that whole bunker thing. There used to be bunkers under schools. Families got bunkers in the back of their house. You know, that type of idea is just not here anymore. You know, that prepper readiness type of attitude is just not amongst the United States population, and which is why I wanted to react to this video in the first place. You know, get people thinking about the stuff that really matters. You know, stop talking about Kim K when Russia literally has more nukes than us, and they have missiles that have way more nuclear tips on them than one, like he was saying, like how most of our nuclear weapons are set up. Russia has intercontinental ballistic missiles that can split off into dozens of nuclear warheads and attack us at once. So it's scary. But hey, y'all, hit that like button, subscribe, and share, man. It's the road to 10K. We're gonna see you next time. Peace.
Da 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 da.